To many of us South Africans, he was the soundtrack to our lives.
Everybody I knew had his records.
The message it had was be anti-establishment. Really, the first opposition to apartheid, they'll tell you that they were influenced by Rodriguez.
But nobody knew anything about him. He was a mystery.
Part of the clip from Searching for Sugar Man, a movie due out later this month. We have Rachel Dodes here to tell us the surprising story about this. This sounds really amazing. I was reading your draft of this. Talk to us about what happens here with this rock star not knowing you were a rock star in another country.
It's a truly unbelievable story.
It's a true story, too.
And it's a true story, which makes it even more unbelievable. There was a guy named Rodriguez who recorded a couple of albums in Detroit in the early 1970s. His record label had high hopes for him, but they completely flopped in the US and no one ever heard of him again. His albums made their way to South Africa, where they ignited people's, people started asking questions about the government and ignited passion for the anti-apartheid movement, and his songs were played at marches, and he became just as popular as the Rolling Stones in the canon with the Beatles, with Simon and Garfunkel, and this guy had no idea and was living in Detroit.
Wow. And then the documentary, as I understand it, this tracks the search for him from people who were living in South Africa and wondered what had happened to their hero.
Yeah, in South Africa, there were a lot of rumors that he set himself ablaze while on stage. He shot himself in the head. Nobody knew. People thought he was dead.
Pretty dramatic.
Very dramatic, like one of the most grotesque rock and roll suicides of all time, if it was true. So these two, one journalist and a record store owner, went on a quest to find out what became of their musical hero, and they were shocked to discover him alive. And I don't want to give away too much for those who don't know the story, but they found him in the late 90s alive and living in Detroit, and brought him back to South Africa to play a series of sold-out arena concerts, and he just couldn't believe it. Here's a guy who didn't know he had an audience, and an audience who thought that their musical hero was dead.
And then the movie is out later this month, but it did quite well at Sundance, I understand.
Yeah, it won 2 big awards at Sundance, and it was the opening night premiere. So
quite an honor to be picked for that.
Yeah. And so they're promoting it with the soundtrack, which is being released by Sony Legacy. So Sony Classics bought the distribution rights, and so they're promoting it together with a series of concerts throughout the country.
And of course, I understand we're hearing more from the artist himself now that he's been rediscovered. And
yeah, I mean, I think that all this happened in the late 90s, and it was a big story in South Africa, but I don't know how many Americans really know about Rodriguez. And so it'll be interesting to see people rediscovering his music, which kind of sounds like it's freshly hatched out of a 1960s, 1970s time capsule.